Okay, fantastic. My disclosures are shown on this slide, and I'm going to start off really with the why this is important. Many of you have seen me show this slide a few times, or you've seen slides that look just like it. This slide shows the epidemiology of heart failure in the US and emphasizes really the enormity of the heart failure problem or challenge that we have. 6.5 million Americans with diagnosed and symptomatic or previously symptomatic heart failure, probably just the tip of the iceberg. A lot of folks with asymptomatic LV systolic or diastolic dysfunction at the base of this pyramid. The annual incidence has now risen to nearly 1 million patients. Heart failure is associated with substantial morbidity, mortality, hospital discharges, hospital costs, outpatient visits, high overall costs. And I really want to emphasize, and you've seen me emphasize this before, is the toll that heart failure takes on our patients. Because as a clinical trialist for many years, when I've had an opportunity to participate in the design of clinical trials, I've generally ranked the ordering of endpoints from death at the top to making patients feel better at the bottom, and hospitalization is in between. But the more you talk to patients, you realize that they see things a little bit differently. And I'm going to show you some data to support that notion. And of course, patients want to live longer, but patients want to feel better, particularly patients with advanced heart failure, class 3, ambulatory class 4 patients. When they come to our clinics, they simply want to feel better. They want to be able to breathe better. They want to have a better quality of life. They want to improve their exercise capacity. And in that regard, it's important to appreciate just how substantial the burden of heart failure is on our patients. So this slide summarizes some data on the physical, social, and emotional impact of heart failure, demonstrating that no matter how you look at it, heart failure has a very substantial impact on our patients. They have mobility problems. They report some kind of pain or discomfort. 76% find it difficult to carry out usual activities. That's cooking, cleaning, bathing, just getting themselves ready for the day. About a quarter of them struggle to take care of themselves really in any way. And about 50% of our heart failure patients have anxiety or depression. And it's important to note that anxiety or depression is completely disease related. These aren't patients that have organic anxiety and depression and require long-term treatment with psychoactive medications. These are patients that feel bad because they feel bad. So this brings me to a discussion of health-related quality of life. And first, I want to define this for you. And then I'm going to show you how I think our heart failure patients look at this by reviewing a few studies that look at sort of time trade-off. What would a heart failure patient give to feel better? So shown on this slide is the World Health Organization definition of quality of life. You can see that quality of life really includes a number of factors. It's an individual's perception of their position in life in the context of the cultural and value systems in which they live and in relation to their goals, expectations, standards, and concerns. And it involves or represents sort of the sum total of their physical health, mental health, functional health, and social health. And we know while heart failure has a significant impact on all of these various domains, and some of our very excellent and disease-specific tools for evaluating health-related quality of life, such as the Minnesota Living with Heart Failure Questionnaire or the Kansas City Cardiomyopathy Questionnaire, are very good at not only looking at overall quality of life or health-related quality of life, but also these various domains. And it gives you quite a bit of insight into how your patient may be doing relative to one or another domain. Are they suffering from social isolation? Is it their physical limitation that really causes them the most angst on a day-to-day basis? And when we look at heart failure patients and how they value quality of life, you can see that they value it quite highly. Traditionally, quality of life has been undervalued relative to its importance to patients. Again, in the heart failure world, particularly in heart failure drug trials, we have focused on morbidity and mortality, time to cardiovascular death and heart failure hospitalization, the primary endpoint of just about every heart failure drug trial, major heart failure drug trial performed over the last 3 decades. Where's the concern for the patient and for their health-related quality of life? And you'll see here that I've shown and referenced what I think are 3 important studies where the investigators assessed the importance of quality of life to their patients. And you can see that in one, the first one starting on the left-hand side of the slide, that 61% of patients attach more value to quality of life over longevity. In the next thing, you can see that these investigators identified 2 distinct groups of patients, one group preferring treatments of prolonged survival time, and another that favored strategies that improve quality of life, but even reduced survival. This is the time trade-off. And in general, it's the patients who are less symptomatic that make living longer their primary goal, and the patients that are more symptomatic that just want to feel better and will often trade time for that improved quality of life. And again, on the third one, same theme here, 65% of patients preferred a shorter life with fewer symptoms. Well, I have to say that I think the heart failure community and indeed the regulatory community is coming around to appreciate the importance of patient-centered or patient-reported outcomes. So heart failure specialists and regulators value patient-reported quality of life. And in fact, the paper that is referenced on this slide comes from a consensus conference that was held on the campus of the FDA, sponsored by the Cardiorenal Drugs Division, to look at endpoints in heart failure in drug development, and they suggested some fundamental principles here. Really, this paper highlights that heart failure patients experience a high burden of symptoms and functional limitations, as I've shown you. There remains an unmet need for new heart failure drugs, despite successful therapies that improve morbidity and mortality. The majority of heart failure drugs in the United States are approved for reducing hospitalization and mortality, with only a few having an indication for improving quality of life, physical function, or symptoms. Improvements in symptoms, physical function, or quality of life are potential approvable endpoints in drug development, and drug development should include a focus on symptomatic and functional benefit in heart failure patients, in addition to drugs that improve survival or reduce hospitalization. And then I'll just conclude this slide by telling you that all of these concepts also apply to device development, where improvements in patient-centered endpoints have frequently, or more frequently than drug trials, been a focus in clinical trials. And in that regard, I will preview some conclusions here about the importance of device therapies for heart failure on patients' health-related quality of life and other functional outcomes. Because it turns out that when you look at those big drug trials in heart failure, and you look at our 4 foundational drugs for the treatment of heart failure, their effects on health-related quality of life are relatively modest, ranging from about 1.5 to 3 or maybe 4 points. But when you look at device therapies in heart failure, and here I'll use the example of cardiac resynchronization therapy, and this isn't a single or isolated example, you will see that device therapies for heart failure have demonstrated large improvements in health-related quality of life. Here, using the Minnesota Living with Heart Failure questionnaire, summarizing 4 of our landmark trials of cardiac resynchronization therapy, between group differences, improvements in quality of life score ranging from about 8 to 10 or 12 points. And again, not a single observation. Think about MitraClip in the COAP trial, 12.5 point improvement in the KCCQ score. And you're going to see some data on the effects of barostimulation on health-related quality of life, which are impressive and more consistent with what's seen with CRT or with MitraClip than what is seen with our drug therapy. Now, finally, who best determines patients' quality of life and symptoms? Well, I want to emphasize that this is the patient and not the physician. Now, think about the clinical equivalent of a quality of life assessment. It's the New York Heart Association functional class ranking, right? So we as clinicians talk to our patients, and then we make some judgment about what their degree of disability is, how well they're doing from a symptomatic or a functional standpoint. And my purpose in showing you this slide is to point out that particularly in classes 2 and 3, this is very subjective, and there is almost complete overlap between class 2 and class 3 when you look at objective markers or patient-reported assessments of their quality of life or their clinical outcomes, the KCCQ, NT-proBNP, LVEF, and so on and so forth. So, quite frankly, clinicians' assessment of New York Heart Association functional class ranking is poorly reflective of quality of life and symptom burden, at least in this middle group of patients. We tend to recognize class 1 asymptomatic patients, and we seem to know when patients are at their end stage. But all those patients in between, it really is the patient who can better judge their own health-related quality of life than their clinician. So we really need to listen to our patients. So I'm going to finish with this last slide, which shows you our 5 complementary goals in heart failure therapy. And of course, we still strive to improve survival and to reduce heart failure related hospitalizations. But I really want to give equal weighting here, and our patients perhaps will give more than equal weighting to improve functional capacity and improve symptoms and health status.